Hi friends, I'm Marianne Romanat and this is Brittany Bethel, and we get to serve together in ministry at a church in Charlotte, North Carolina called Light of Christ United Methodist Church. And we're excited to announce the beginning of a new podcast today, which we're introducing with this first episode, just to give you an idea of what our motivation is to begin this podcast conversation. And we're calling this monthly conversation Affirming Methodism. We're here to talk about how to take steps toward a more inclusive, affirming, diverse church. We want these conversations to be about how the church can move forward. That's what we need, is to move forward. We're envisioning a new way of being the church, and we'll be learning from those who have experience and insights, and we'll be listening to voices we need to hear to get there.
Yeah, for instance, we know that young people, that students are leaving the church at really fast rates. And so just some stats, because I'm a stats person. We know from the Barna Group, which is the leading research organization that looks at the intersection between faith and culture. And they say that 44% of students are leaving because they're dissatisfied with the church's perceived stance on social and political issues. 36% are leaving because they feel disconnected from the church. 34% because they doubt the authenticity of their faith. 24% said because they've had negative experiences with church and church people. And 20% are saying because just personal and spiritual changes in their own life, and they feel like the church is not really connecting to them on those levels. And so if we're going to be a church that looks forward, we have to consider why people are leaving at such drastic rates, and work to bridge that gap and to be just to be a voice that affirms people, that moves people forward, that says, hey, we hear you, and God speaks directly into those situations all of the time. So I think for me personally, one thing that it's been for me for the church that felt disconnected is I had to shut parts off of myself. So being a part of the LGBTQ community, but also being very clear that God called me to serve the church. For 20 years, I served the church without any affirmation that I was good enough or that I was enough as a person. And so it wasn't until I came to Light of Christ and got to work with Pastor Marianne that I understood that I could be completely myself, be completely who God created me to be and called me to be, without turning parts off when I walked into the church building. And I think a lot of people that maybe aren't called to serve the church like I was, don't see the reason to turn those parts off. They're just not coming. And so how can we be a church where every part of a person is welcome, whether that be their nationality, whether that be their race, gender identity, their sexual orientation, their just personhood as a whole? How can we be a church that makes sure that they can walk right in the door?
There's an important book that was written by Phyllis Tickle back in 2008, and it seems especially relevant today. And it was titled The Great Emergence: How Christianity is Changing and Why. And basically what the book is about massive transitions that seem to occur about every 500 years in the church. We see a reformation of some kind about every 500 years in the history of the church. So far, we've seen the Great Transformation, she called it, which is when God walked among us in Jesus Christ. Then the time of Gregory the Great, who brought about reforms within Catholicism and then began the Dark Ages. Then the Great Schism around the year 1000. That was when the Eastern Orthodox churches broke away from the Western Roman Catholic Church. And then the Great Reformation, the Protestant Reformation of approximately 1500. So every 500 years, Tickle writes, the empowered structures of institutionalized Christianity, whatever they may be, become an intolerable carapace that must be shattered so that renewal and growth may occur. Now is such a time. And one time she was interviewed on PBS, and this has been a while now. This has been 15 years ago. And she referred to this every 500 years theory and said, the church has a giant rummage sale. And so that's really the way I'm thinking about this, is what needs to go in the rummage sale and what do we need to keep? What's valuable? what's going to carry the gospel forward, and then what is it that we need to sell in this rummage sale so that there can be newness of life in the church, and so we can move forward with the way the Spirit is leading the church. So this podcast is about that rummage sale. That's what we're going to be talking about with our guests who come on. We're going to talk about what's valuable for the church and how is God leading us forward. And now that we've gone through the COVID-19 global pandemic and change is naturally occurring more readily in the church and society as a whole, we see this opportunity, I think, for the church to leave behind parts of our past, the unfruitful parts, the harmful parts of our past, and embrace a more hopeful and fruitful future. So as a pastor, I can say that some of the most faithful members I've had in churches have been part of the LGBTQ plus community. I've seen these folks, despite the way they have been harmed repeatedly by the church, have continued to be faithful, have given financially, have served, have been leaders in the church, made sacrifices personally to see the church move forward, mentored young people, served in behind-the-scenes ways and up-front ways. I've seen that over the years. And, as a pastor, I've really felt the support of the LGBTQ community as well, just personally. So the list goes on, and we're hopeful that harmful language will be removed from the United Methodist Book of Discipline when we get to the General Conference in 2024, which is really, it's almost exactly a year from now, and it's here in Charlotte. But we don't know. We have no idea what will transpire at General Conference, and so we're prayerful about that.
Yes.
We're also hopeful that as a local church, we can take more steps to be affirming. We have a long way to be more affirming of our LGBTQ siblings, and it's clear that all of God's children have a safe place in this family, and we want that to be more and more clear as we go forward.
Yeah.
As a pastor, I'm also blessed to serve a church that is multicultural and multi-ethnic and growing in that way. It's really so humbling. I've never been part of a church that is as diverse as this one is. And I think at this point, what we're trying to do is figure out how to be more affirming of folks who are from a different culture than we are.
Right.
And, I think, for example, of a family that's part of our church, they've immigrated here from South Korea. And it's interesting to see them maneuver the challenges that language brings for them. And recently, the mother of the family told me that after church, she goes home and she watches the worship service again so that she can try to understand more of what was said in the service.
Yeah.
And so just thinking about the sacrifice that takes to be part of this community, and yet that's very valuable to this family, and they're serving and sharing of their gifts with this church. So that's a way that we need to grow in terms of being an affirming church as well.
Yeah, so we have to figure out how to be a church that is ready for people that are different than us, and we obviously look similar. We both female, both white. So how do we make sure that we're creating a church that is ready for anybody to walk through the door, like we've been waiting on them, like we're ready for them to come and be a part of this family. And like Pastor Marianne said, it's really important for us that anyone that walks through from any nationality feels welcome, seen, heard, and so that's really important to us. We have to learn how to celebrate diversity. Diversity in culture, diversity in the way that we do life, the way maybe family structures look. We have to be ready and prepared to celebrate diversity. We have to provide education and resources. I think about speaking just from the LGBTQ community. I can't speak to every letter in that acronym. Like I can't speak to that. So I have learning to do to be able to speak and to be able to affirm and to be able to lift up brothers and sisters that are also a part of that community. And we all have to be willing to learn from other people that are experiencing life in a different way. That comes with nationality, multicultural stuff as well. How do we learn from people when we talk immigration? How do we talk about documentation status and learning about the system? Because a lot of us haven't ever had to navigate that system, and so there's a lot to learn there. And we've got to create safe and brave spaces It's not easy to put yourself out there in a marginalized community to say, hey, this needs to be different, to a majority community. That's a really hard thing to do. And so how do we create spaces where people feel seen and heard and comfortable enough to say, I think this needs to change, or I think maybe this is a blind spot, or we just have to be able to create space where that's important. And so we have to encourage dialogue. We have to have everyone sitting at the table together to be able to make sure that everyone's voice is heard equally. And then learn how to embrace change, which as a church is hard. But I think that, as you were saying, like this 500-year shift that's happening, we feel it. If you're a part of a church, maybe you've served the church for more than one decade, you can feel a shift happening in the church. And something like we're in some kind of weird dynamic right now of like, what's going on? And I do think it's part of the shift. And so it's really exciting to be a part of that and to just watch God work in those spaces.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really opening up some opportunities for people who've been away from the church for some time. And we've been seeing more people who have been away from the church. And I think some people are sensing that there are some new things happening in this church and in the greater church that hopefully they want to be a part of. So as we went through the pandemic, I know I kept hearing God saying to me in times of prayer, look forward, don't look back.
Yeah.
And that has remained the challenge, I think, for us, is to look forward and not back. Instead of getting caught up in the way things used to be before the pandemic in particular, but going farther back than that, ministry has changed so much just in the 25 years that I've been in ministry. So just continuing to look forward and keep learning, I think that's a lot of the goal. And so, God's calling us to lean forward into the hopeful future that God has for the church. And we believe the genius of John Wesley is relevant today.
Yeah.
The practice of holiness of heart and life, putting our faith into action, embracing the world as our parish, agreeing to disagree on the non-essentials, the centrality of small groups, evangelism as going to where people are, and offering them Christ, and then the primary focus on grace. These are all things that are Wesleyan emphases and so important to reach this generation and the next generation for Christ. And so when it comes to a hopeful future for the United Methodist Church and a hopeful future for Light of Christ in particular, what needs to stay and what needs to go in the rummage sale? Let's talk about it. So we invite you to join us again next time. We're going to be releasing our first regular monthly episode the last Wednesday of the month, which this month is May 31st. And each month we'll continue to release, hopefully on that last Wednesday of the month. So make sure you don't miss new content as it comes out. You want to subscribe on our YouTube channel. And also you can find this podcast anywhere that you listen to podcasts, and go ahead and subscribe so that you'll know when new content comes out. So until then, remember, love God, love your neighbor, and affirm and celebrate the beauty in you.